Hi, my name is Lee Burley, and this is my video on cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is one of the key ways a cell gains energy. It is defined as a set of metabolic reactions that take place in an organism's cells in order to convert biochemical energy into adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Now, the most efficient way a cell creates ATP is through aerobic cellular respiration. Aerobic respiration requires oxygen in order to generate ATP. It is the preferred method of pyruvate breakdown from glycolysis and requires that pyruvate enter the mitochondria in order to be fully oxidized by the Krebs cycle. Aerobic respiration is 19 times more efficient than anaerobic respiration. These two processes share the same pathway as glycolysis. However, aerobic respiration continues on with the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, whereas anaerobic respiration continues on with a process called fermentation. Now, cellular respiration has three main stages. These are glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Glycolysis is the first stage of cellular respiration. The term glycolysis simply means splitting sugars. In this process, glucose, a 6-carbon sugar, is split into 2 molecules of a 3-carbon sugar. The products of glycolysis are 2 molecules of ATP, 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, and 2 high-energy molecules of NADH. Glycolysis can occur with or without oxygen. Without oxygen, glycolysis allows cells to make small amounts of ATP. This process is what we know as fermentation. Even during aerobic respiration, glycolysis only produces a net total of 2 molecules of ATP. The second stage of aerobic respiration is known as the Krebs cycle. It's also known as the citric acid cycle. In the presence of oxygen, a pyruvate molecule enters the Krebs cycle inside the matrix of the mitochondria and gets oxidized into CO2. The CO2, or carbon dioxide, is then converted into ATP. In order to produce its total amount of energy yield of 2 molecules of ATP, the Krebs cycle must be completed twice. Now, the third stage of aerobic respiration is known as the electron transport chain. Electron transport requires oxygen directly. Now, the electron transport chain is a series of electron carriers in the membrane of the mitochondria. These high-energy electrons are passed to oxygen through a series of reactions. A gradient is formed, and ultimately, about 34 molecules of ATP are produced. As previously mentioned, each step of aerobic respiration produces ATP. Glycolysis produces 2 molecules of ATP. The Krebs cycle produces 2 molecules of ATP, and the electron transport chain produces 34 molecules of ATP, which all totaled up equals roughly 38 molecules of ATP that is produced by aerobic respiration. Now, with all this talk about ATP, you may be wondering what it is and why is it so important. Well, ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is the amino acid adenine with 3 phosphate groups attached. The bonds connecting the phosphate molecules to adenine are highly energetic bonds. This energy contained in these bonds is used to drive processes such as cellular respiration when broken down. ATP is not just produced by aerobic respiration. It can also be produced by a type of anaerobic respiration called fermentation. As we mentioned earlier, the process of glycolysis, when not in the presence of oxygen, goes into fermentation instead of the Krebs cycle. Many anaerobic organisms and special types of cells, such as muscle cells, which occasionally function without oxygen during extreme activities such as athletics, use fermentation to create their energy. After glycolysis converts glucose into pyruvate, the pyruvate is then converted into lactate, at least as far as muscle cells go anyways. This further reduction of pyruvate produces a little more ATP for the cells to use. Lactic acid, however, can build up during this process, which causes the muscle soreness you feel after exercising. Though this process does create ATP, it is not able to do so for very long periods of time. This causes fermentation to be a rather inefficient way to create ATP, far less so efficient than the aerobic process of cellular respiration. Hi. Now, one of the most important substances in cellular respiration is glucose. Now, what I'm going to show you today is how ATP is generally formed in our cells. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this gummy bear right here. That's it. That's it, right there. Alright, I'm going to drop it in the test tube, which has potassium chloride inside it. Alright? And I'm going to boil that down, and it's going to act as an enzyme, and it's going to break down the molecules of glucose, well, actually sucrose, but it works the same in this case. And it's going to break down these molecules and enable the molecules in the gummy bear to create both heat and light energy. Now, it's not quite the same as the ATP that is formed in our cells, but it reacts the same way in our cells as it's going to in this experiment. So, well, let's give it a shot. Now what I'm doing here is just simply melting this the powdered form of potassium chloride down into its liquid form. I'm trying to be sure to melt on all sides. Oh, there it's good. Shut off the gas. We'll give it a shot. Look at that thing. Alright, so now we have here charred remains of a very good friend of mine, Mr. Gummy Bear. However, that is basically what happens in our cells when our cells decide to break down the glucose molecules and create ATP. And, you know, as we covered earlier, the ATP is what creates the energy that our bodies use in order to perform activities and other things that require movement, motion, things like that. Alright, and ATP is just the simple energy source that powers all of our cells to do any activity we desire to do. So, I hope you enjoyed this little video, and this is Lee Burley signing off.
Ich bin ein Gummibär, ich bin ein Gummibär, ich bin